Hello, friends. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Thriving Artist Podcast. I'm Jamie Smith. I'm an artist. I live in Vancouver, Canada.
And I'm Kaylan Butine. I'm an artist and I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
And today we are chatting all about applying to exhibitions or shows. So, this isn't a topic that every artist might deal with or is familiar with because there are so many paths of being an artist. So, you might never consider applying to exhibit your work. But for lots of us, this is a big part of our practice. So, applying for shows, exhibiting our work is part of sort of the labor of love that we have to remember that's part of being an artist because we do want our work that we make sort of in this isolation of our studio. We want it out in the world, and getting an exhibition is a great way to be able to do that.
Absolutely, Jamie. And this is really something that you and I both have a lot of experience with because we've submitted lots of places. But also we have that other side, the curatorial experience. I've been running Stay Home Gallery, a brick and mortar gallery for the last 3 years, and we have done, I don't know, like 30 shows or something. So there's just been a lot of exchange from both sides that I've seen, especially over the past 3 years. And there's really been a lot that I've learned from watching so many submissions come in and the different levels of professionalism in the ways in which artists sort of follow instructions and the ways in which they communicate. So we just wanted to give you all a head start or, cover some things that maybe you already do, but maybe there's some things just that would serve as good reminders of kind of healthy practices and things to do and be aware of when you're applying to shows.
And I will start us off. So, number one, we want to visualize the commitment and check your schedule. So, these are 5 things to do when applying for a show. And this is really important because I have over applied in the past. And these seem like arbitrary dates in the future. It's sort of your future self's problem. And I totally get this idea of, applying to a lot of places, hoping that you get one of them, but sometimes you get all of them or you get most of them. And it can be really difficult to actually make it all work. Kaylan, I know for you, you sometimes have like stacked a season of many shows almost by accident because of applying for things like this. And so it's really important when you're kind of sitting down to see what is possible for me to really visualize the commitment that you're going to have to make. Sometimes there's traveling involved. Sometimes you're committing to an entire show versus submitting a piece is very different. And
Mm-hmm.
we want to make sure that we're thinking about our schedule, thinking about our families, thinking about sort of what that future self will have to do with because you will have to deal with her eventually. So make sure that you're looking at a calendar and you're kind of visualizing what this all will look like for you.
Yeah, I've definitely been on the other side of this one where I bit off more than I could chew in certain seasons. And, some of that is just the way things have shaken out due to the pandemic. Of course, there's been lots of shifting that artists have experienced in the past few years. But I do think it's really important to, as you said, think of your future self, to not just get caught up in sort of the energy of the promotion around the exhibition, but really think through the timeline, pull out your calendar and say, okay, if I got into this show, is this even a good time for me? Like, am I going to be out of the country, or am I going to, kind of be already working on this other solo show? Because when you get in somewhere, it affects your life. You're going to have things to do. You're going to have to make a trip to the store. You're going to have to get that work ready to show. You're going to have money for shipping it or whatever it is, so just really being aware. Because for me, I've been on the other side of this where as a gallerist or a curator, you go through all these submissions, all this work to accept, somebody into a show. And if that artist emails and says, whoops, sorry, that piece was already across the country, or I can't get this one ready, or I don't have the budget to ship this work, or whatever kind of comes up, which those things happen, but it is disappointing, and it does kind of make you think twice about working with that artist, because you would have wanted them to have the forethought to say, that's just not really good time for me, so I'm not going to apply. Like kind of it's like a pre-commitment, you know? And so when that commitment does roll back around, you want the artist to show up for that. So it can be a bummer when they don't. Okay, let's move on to number 2 of things to do when applying to shows. This is piggybacking off this first one, but we want you to keep track of your submissions. So I do this just on a simple Excel spreadsheet that I actually keep in my Google Drive. Just keeping track of where I applied, how much money I spent. I have a different tab for each year of submissions. What the timeline of the show would be if I were to get in, if I got accepted or rejected. It's just really helpful to kind of see a big picture of your applications and your submissions to see where you're putting your energy as an artist and where you're putting your money, right? Hopefully you're keeping track of all those submission fees and following a budget for those things rather than just kind of letting that money go out the door without thinking about it. So however you choose to organize that information, I think just have a system for keeping track of all of your submissions. It can be really helpful to have that information at your fingertips.
It's also really nice to have a space to put submissions that maybe aren't a fit right now. So
Mm-hmm.
we talk a lot about in all of our planning tools, like the Thriving Artist Map, we do a lot of things called parking lots, and they're places to just put future ideas. And especially when it comes to submissions, that someone might send a really great opportunity for you, but this just isn't the year for it. So
Mm-hmm.
having some sort of spreadsheet where you're sort of tracking your goals, what you want, but then also maybe like future things you're working towards. Maybe you're just not ready to submit to something so big. It's really nice to have that tracking system in place because you won't then miss out on something a few years later. So I like that.
Absolutely.
So our third do when you're applying for shows, it seems really simple and obvious, but it's actually a lot of work, is follow all instructions. So every submission, what I find really hard is they all want things different.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only, a few components like your CV and your images and your artist statement that they want, but typically they're very specific around how they want this applied for because they're getting so many submissions. And it's also that kind of first step, like we've talked about, this first step is a commitment. So making sure you have a plan. But it's also this first step of showing the gallerist and curator that you can communicate well, you're professional, and you can follow instructions because they're kind of looking at you as saying, do we want to invest in this person's practice? And do we want them as part of our roster of artists? So it really does matter in this first stage to follow all of those instructions, but it can feel a little overwhelming if you're doing many applications. So just something to think about as you're going through is like really watching how you're labeling things and really just taking care because it's an easy way to not allow yourself in the running if you
Yeah.
don't follow instructions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what you said, Jamie, it makes me think that, you see hundreds of submissions come in and it's like the ones that can easily be eliminated, not if not even before they look at the work, are the ones that are like, well, this person didn't even write their last name, or they forgot to include their email address, so we can't even email them back, so we're just going to kind of go ahead and eliminate that person. Like that really does happen where they're not just looking at your work when you're applying, they're looking at how well you communicate, they're looking at your level of professionalism. So if you can, just do your best and go slowly through the application process, make sure you're really thorough, really think about quality over quantity, I think, when applying to submissions, and put your best foot forward when you're able to. And I say this all while give yourself lots of grace because we all make mistakes. I have definitely had to email a gallery or have had like a curator email me and say, we want more information because you forgot to do this part or whatever. So like things happen. We are all going to have our fair share of submission blunders, if you will, but just going slowly and being intentional and following all the instructions is, one way to put your best foot forward.
Well, as we're talking through all this, I think it's really useful as artists that if you have the opportunity to ever sit on a jury or help someone curate a show, those opportunities do come around as artists. And it's easy to kind of say, that's not in my wheelhouse, but having the experience of being on the other side of looking at all of these submissions, it really helps as an artist to remember how the best practices of applying. I think that's how we wrote this episode, is from this experience of looking at submissions and knowing that, if people don't follow instructions, that's an easy way to get through because you're getting hundreds of applications.
Yes.
So just something to think about. If that opportunity ever comes your way as an artist, I highly recommend taking it, at least once, to kind of feel what it's like to be on the other side. Because as artists, we can feel like it's very hard on our side, and it's kind of nice to be in the other person's shoes on the other end of your application.
Oh, 100%. I only was able to write this episode because I have that gallerist experience. And it's almost like, when you get your first serving job, you suddenly tip so much better because you realize how hard it is to be a server, right? I think, as you said, many artists just don't understand all of the work that goes into being a gallerist or a curator. Oftentimes we complain about the big commission that they take, because we just don't see all the labor that goes into putting on a show. And actually, our Taking Up Space exhibition program is a great way for you to possibly get some of that experience. Lots of artists in our community put on shows every spring as part of that program, and many of them host an open call, and you kind of get to see firsthand like what it's like to have people send you their work and realize you need this information organized well. You need, that communication.
A system.
Yeah, you need a system. So I get it. Okay, I'm going to move us on to number 4 of the top 5 things we want you to do when you're applying to shows. Label your images. So most applications actually have instructions for this right on the submission form. Obviously, make sure you follow their instructions for whatever they want you to do in terms of how they've laid out how they want you to label your images. But just in case they don't, that might be something they forgot to include or just, didn't think of. I would highly recommend that you name or label your image files with your last name, your first name, and the title of the piece of that image. I usually divide those words up with either periods or underscores to make it easy to read, right? If it's all just a bunch of letters flowing together, it's harder to read it. For my gallery, we've used Submittable and Google Forms in the past for big open calls. And a lot of times what happens is that all of the images just kind of get dumped into this one folder. And then you have to go through and sort out, okay, whose image was what, or which work went with what artist. And so when those files are named appropriately, it can make it super easy to look and find an artist's work. But, most of our files, when they're generated, they just come up with this weird number, right? Or like something, something, something .jpeg. So we really want you to take the extra, 3 minutes that it will cost you to label your images before you apply. This is really like one of those finishing touches that can help you appear so much more professional, because you're making it easy on the gallery and the curator, and that's really what you want to do when you apply places.
We want to be an easy yes, easy person that they remember as was really organized. And yeah, the more you are on the other side of submissions or organizing art events, the more you realize how much you appreciate organized and professional artists, for sure.
Yes.
So last but not least, our number 5 thing to do when applying for shows is to be patient. So just remembering, again, it's that other side of things, that gallerists and curators are humans, and they have received sometimes hundreds of applications for submissions. And so they've tried to create a system. It might not be perfect, but we want to try to do what we can for them. And then know that it's going to take a while to get those answers from your application, and just be patient with that process. So, which can be hard.
Yeah, it can be hard as an artist because all you're thinking about is kind of, did I get in the show or didn't I? I need to know, right? But as a gallerist, like I've been on, the other side where all of a sudden that deadline is there where you've said that you would send out all these acceptance or rejection letters. And it's a lot of information to go through. Maybe you didn't give yourself enough time and you're regretting that. Maybe you haven't heard back from your guest curator and they're wanting more time. I think it's always better as a gallery to, if you're not going to make that deadline, to email everybody and just say, hey, folks, we need a few more days. But I've had artists email me like, 11:59 the day before they were planning to get we were planning to get the acceptance letters out, and say, what's going on? How come I haven't heard anything? And like, that doesn't like put a very good taste in your mouth, because you're like over there working hard, you're staying up late trying to get all those submissions read and look at all the work. And if you have artists kind of knocking on your door, like saying, come on, haven't heard from you, it can feel a little triggering. And again, just everybody is doing their best, just trusting that folks are really trying, they're working hard, they're putting their best foot forward, and being a little bit patient with people, I think, is really good. I think it's okay to reach out if you haven't heard from a gallery or, a curator or an exhibition, let's say 3, 4, 5 days after you are expecting to hear from them. Maybe that will give them the nudge to say, hey, feel free to email all of us and let us know, because we're waiting here. It's not like we don't want you to show up and be very human in this process, but I think just being patient is helpful.
And we need to be patient with ourselves. Putting yourself out there with submissions and exhibiting your work, it's a lot. It's being vulnerable, but it's also, we're building a muscle, and that muscle is practicing getting our work out there through these submission processes. And it will go faster over time. You kind of almost create like your package, for that year of your submissions. So it just takes a little organization to get your spreadsheet organized, get those labels on the images. And the more you do it, the more, success you will. I have had them this year, rejections from things, but there will be some acceptance in things, and that is well worth it. So we hope this was helpful. We hope this is helpful in building your submission muscle. And as always, we are here for you. We are cheering you on, and we believe in the work that you are doing as thriving artists.